Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress. I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to continue in the book Codeword Barbelon, 666, Danger in the Vatican, the Sons of Loyola and Their Plans for World Domination by P.D. Stuart. You get this book at luxverbi.org. That's luxverbi.org. And I highly recommend this book, and it's second in the series, also entitled Codeword Barbelon. The subtitle of it is Antichrist is a Woman, Alive and Well Again. We're speaking specifically about the Roman Catholic Church. In this book, Book 1, we're currently dealing with the Rhodes Scholarship, and particularly Bill Clinton. And we learned that the Rhodes Scholarship was provided for in a will by the founder of it, Cecil Rhodes, a diamond and gold magnate, made lots of money, and he was certainly a Freemason. And he created a secret society in service to the papacy, in service to the Jesuit order, in order to raise the papacy to world supremacy, to form a global government for the Pope. And we're talking now specifically about Bill Clinton, past President Bill Clinton, a Rhodes Scholar, one of the picked men to work for this global government. And we read here, it says, read what Professor Carroll Quigley, whom Bill Clinton praises so much, says on page 21 of his book about those groomed under the Rhodes Scholarship scheme. Quote, there's some question whether the ability of the Fellows of All Souls to elect as their young colleagues men with brilliant futures to be explained by their ability to discern greatness at an early age, or by the fact that election to the fellowship opens the door to achievement in public affairs. There's some reason to believe that the second of these two alternatives is of greater weight, unquote. Bill Clinton is a prime example. Although Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar, he never completed his studies at Oxford. He left without an Oxford degree. His Oxford coursework never added up to a degree. Why? He didn't need it. The Rhodes Scholar always rises to the top. After leaving Oxford without a degree, Bill Clinton attended Yale Law School, reputedly the best law school in America. According to historian David Moranis, who wrote the biography of Clinton, Bill Clinton, quote, graduated, unquote, from Yale without a law degree, for which he studied there at Yale. And Moranis further says, quote, he, meaning Clinton, was never first in his class academically. He was fifth in his high school class, unquote. Yet Clinton was elected Phi Beta Kappa. Now remember, we talked about Phi Beta Kappa before. That's a Masonic Masonic literary society, just one of the cogs in the Jesuit wheel to build this global kingdom for the papacy. He was elected Phi Beta Kappa at the Jesuit-run Georgetown University, no less. So his Jesuit and Freemasonic connections are clearly established here. Rhodes Scholarship, Georgetown graduate, Phi Beta Kappa. He's been handsomely groomed for his role as President of the United States. And it says there are many sites on the Internet incorrectly saying that Clinton has a law degree from Yale. Unbelievably, after leaving Yale without a degree, Clinton got a post as professor of law at the University of Arkansas. How does a person who never finished his university education at two separate Ivy League universities get appointed as assistant professor of law at the University of Arkansas? How would you like it if your child's law professor were a law school dropout. Anyone else, and that would be regarded as rather mediocre. It says Clinton was also Attorney General of Arkansas without a degree. How is that possible? As the biographer of Viscount Halifax put it, quote, "It is safe to assert that the Fellow of All Souls," in other words, a Rhodes Scholar, this is just one of the names that they go by, a Fellow of All Souls, a Rhodes Scholar, is a man marked out for a position of authority in public life, and there is no surprise if he reaches the summit of power, but only disappointment if he falls short of the opportunities that are set out before him. So they clearly set out whatever opportunities they want him to avail himself of, and they're only disappointed if he doesn't rise to the level. But they've cultured him, nurtured him, and groomed him for the halls of power in this country, and that goes for every Rhodes Scholar. Now, the moral of all this is, not everyone who rises to greatness, presidents, prime ministers, etc., are necessarily men of the highest ability. Such men are often chosen for their usefulness to the powers that rule behind the scenes. Carroll Quigley, remember, Jesuit priest at Georgetown University, Carroll Quigley, Bill Clinton's Jesuit professor, informs us that, quote, "In his Confession of Faith, Cecil Rhodes outlined the types of persons who might be useful members of this secret society. President Clinton was one such man, a Rhodes Scholar who got the usual ticket to Oxford and then jobbed into the White House. He was jobbed right into the White House by intrigues. And according to Carroll Quigley, Bill Clinton's mentor, Rhodes Scholars are tools or instruments of the Rhodes Secret Society. For only those who would carry forward the ideals and purposes of the Rhodes-Milner Secret Society were to be granted Rhodes Scholarships." So if you're a recipient of a Rhodes Scholarship, you're on your way to helping build this global government for the Pope. And if you're one of those hooked on the notion of Bill as a nice guy, then consider these words of his. Listen to what Bill Clinton says, quote, "We can't be so fixated on our desire to preserve the rights of ordinary citizens," unquote, ordinary Americans. I wonder who he considers extraordinary Americans. Now, if you stop and think that he's been cultured with this Jesuitical, Freemasonic, Rhodes Scholarship, entry into the secret society, trained by the Jesuits at Georgetown, wouldn't he think that the extraordinary Americans might be Catholic? He's got an entirely Catholic training here. Who would this elite Roman Catholic shoe-in for the White House regard as ordinary Americans? The author doesn't say so in this text, but I'm inserting that he is referring to non-Catholics. And it is embodied in Roman Catholic canon law and encyclicals and papal writings that Protestants have no rights that the Pope doesn't give them. And he may take away their rights at will. And this is the disdain that President Clinton displayed for all the Americans during the Waco tragedy. They were non-Catholics. And of course, they used the Jesuit-controlled media to defame that separatist religious organization by saying that they had guns. Oh, they demonize them. They have lots of guns. Well, it's legal in America to own guns. It's advisable for Americans to own guns. It's protected in the Second Amendment to the Constitution. But the American people listened to that garbage. And they allowed the president, through the Jesuit-controlled press, to demonize those people. And, of course, they used the same load of hooey that they used against Tony Alamo, that he was sleeping with the little girls. And then they burned him. They burned him in their own house. It was a public auto da fe. It was a public burning of heretics. And that's the way it should have been seen by the American people. But they softened up the American people with propaganda, demonizing them as some sort of a renegade, violent, unpatriotic threat to our society and a threat to the little girls in the ministry. And America saw that place burn, and there was no outrage. That was just a taste of what's coming to this country. Just a taste of what's coming to this country. And he said, even on the White House lawn, I'm repeating myself because I've talked about this before, but it bears repeating. Right on the White House lawn, he said, this is what's going to happen with runaway sects, with private sects like this. In other words, you'd be all right if you joined the mainstream Christian churches. But if you try to separate yourself, this is what's going to happen. And the American people just stood silent. He continues, he says, and it bears repeating that the Rhodes Secret Society was founded on the constitutions of the Jesuits. What rights do you think the Jesuits give Protestants in their constitution? You know, they were created for the very purpose of destroying Protestants and Protestantism, exterminating them from the face of the whole earth. That's exactly what they fully intend to do. And they intend to use our government to achieve it in this country. He says it bears repeating that the Rhodes Secret Society was founded on the constitutions of the Jesuits, and so we have to consider whether Clinton, a former student of Jesuit Georgetown University, being selected for a Rhodes Scholarship, might not also be a tool of the Jesuits. He most certainly is. And it says, is it coincidence that Mr. Rhodes would set up a secret society giving instructions in his wills to conceal his plans for that society by replacing the words Roman Catholic religion in the Jesuit constitutions with the words English Empire? Once again, we see the frightful intrigues of the Jesuits. To quote William T. Steed, Rhodes's collaborators and mentor, Mr. Rhodes was more than the founder of a dynasty. He aspired to be the creator of one of the vast, semi-religious, quasi-political associations which, like the Society of Jesus, have played so large a part in the history of the world. To be more strictly accurate, he wished to found an order as the instrument of the will of the dynasty. And while he lived, he dreamed of being both its Caesar and its Loyola, unquote. And it was Oxford University that Rhodes and his helpers would use as the training ground for their New World Anglo-American operatives. Quigley tells us on page 33 that Lord Milner and Cecil Rhodes, quote, were contemporaries at Oxford, but more than that, they were members of a secret society which had been founded in 1891. The secret society of Cecil Rhodes is mentioned in the first 5 of his 7 wills. In the 5th will, it was supplemented by the idea of an educational institution with scholarships, whose alumni would be bound together by common ideals, Rhodes ideals, and a secret oath. And you just have to know that those ideals are Jesuit ideals. And the oath would certainly be very similar to that oath taken by the Jesuit order. Look, it was the order was already founded on the constitutions of the Jesuits. It's just Jesuitism by another name. And it says, however, that there has been an attempt to cover up this Jesuit conspiracy is seen from the fact that in 1912, Sir George Parkin, a Canadian graduate of Oxford and former principal of Upper Canada College, wrote a book called The Rhodes Scholarship, in which he devoted several pages to each of Rhodes' 7 wills. Yet he said nothing about the secret society expressly mentioned in all but 2 of Rhodes' wills. Now, what is the most astonishing about Parkin's failure to mention the secret society, which finds so central a place in 5 of Rhodes' 7 wills, is that Parkin was the organizing secretary of the Rhodes Scholarship from 1902 to his retirement in 1918. We're left to assume that Parkin's failure to even mention the secret society was deliberate, especially since Parkin matriculated from Oxford on the same day as Cecil Rhodes and was, quote, charged with much of the organization and implementation of the scholarships throughout North America, unquote. How could Dr. Parkin not have known about this key fact? How could he have overlooked the use of the Jesuit constitutions? Coming back to the most famous Rhodes Scholar, Bill Clinton. Clinton still speaks highly of his Jesuit professors at Georgetown University. Clinton expressed his admiration for the Jesuit Carroll Quigley in 1989 in Antius, journals, notebooks, and diaries. It says Clinton even gave his former mentor, Quigley, tribute in his presidential nomination speech at the Democratic Party convention in 1992. And on November 7, 2001, Clinton gave a speech at Georgetown University on foreign policy and globalization. Foreign policy and globalization, 2 very key areas of endeavor to create a global government. And it says Joseph Curl, the Washington Times, November 8, 2001, reports that Clinton, a member of the class of 68, opened his 50-minute speech by thanking another of his former professors, the Jesuit Otto Hentz. Quote, I would also like to say a special word of thanks to one of my professors, Father Otto Hentz, unquote, Bill said. He never abandoned me over all these years, even though he did not succeed in convincing me to become a Jesuit, unquote. He then added, however, that Otto Hentz never abandoned him over all these years. Over all what years? During his years in public life, and while he even occupied the White House. And we know from the Jesuit oath and from the Jesuit history that Jesuit priests seek to become the confessors and the advisors of the powerful people in government. And so he was the advisor to President Bill Clinton. We had a Jesuit temporal coadjutor in the White House, and he was advised by Jesuit Otto Hentz. And it says, as a child, Clinton went to St. John's Catholic Church. He also attended the Jesuit Georgetown University, so he had a good Catholic education. I do not say here that Clinton is or was at any time a Jesuit, says the author, for I cannot prove it. But if anyone were to come forward with proof, I should not be the least surprised. Clearly, the Jesuit professors Quigley and Hentz saw Clinton as an asset to their cause, and it would seem that he has served them just as well as a political protege, if not as a Jesuit. During his acceptance speech in 1992, Clinton alluded to this fact by deliberately misquoting 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. Quote, As the Scripture says, our eyes have not yet seen, nor our ears heard, nor our minds imagined what we can build, unquote. The actual passage of 1 Corinthians 2:9 says, does not use the words build. Clinton continued by naming the Jesuit who directed him and to whom he owed his highest station. Quote, as a student at Georgetown, I heard that call to build, clarified by the professor named Carroll Quigley, unquote. Now, what is that call, and what are they building? One thing is certain. They are not building a heavenly kingdom. They are building a kingdom of Antichrist, an earthly kingdom. That prophesied in the Scriptures. Now, the following revelation exposes the defiling alchemy of the Jesuits, their secret plan for building a new world order within the Rhodes Secret Society and the Rhodes Scholarship Scheme. Quoting sections from the American Review of Reviews, May 1902, page 556, Steed, Cecil Rhodes's closest collaborator, quotes directly from Mr. Rhodes in a letter written in 1890. Quote, please remember the key of my idea discussed with you as a society, copied from the Jesuit as to organization, unquote. Another reference that his secret society, the key of which is that it is copied after the Jesuit order as to its organization. Where did we see this once more in history? It was the SS. Himmler's SS was fashioned after the Jesuit order, and we all know what resulted from that. Extermination of heretics, Protestants, Orthodox, and Jews. And that's exactly what they're planning again. History just cannot allow and will not allow any other conclusion. We're seeing history repeated right before our very eyes. And it says, now read what Bill Clinton, the famous Rhodes Scholar, said about two leading Jesuits from Georgetown where he was trained and groomed for the U.S. presidency. Quote, I have to say a special word to leave of Father O'Donnell about two past presidents of Georgetown, both named Healy. The second, Timothy Healy, passed away just a few days ago, and he was Father O'Donovan's predecessor. He was my friend, and in his effects when he died were found 4 pages of an outline of instructions for me for my inaugural address, that is for U.S. President. And I know he's looking down at us, and I want him to know that I have absorbed the instructions and have taken some and rejected some. So he was advised by his Jesuits, knowing full well that he was going to become President of the United States. He was a shoo-in. A picked man, picked by the Jesuits. And he served the Jesuit general well during his years in office. You're listening to the Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a left behind rapture scenario, this false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Okay, welcome back to the second half of Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. If you enjoy Inquisition Update, please support Inquisition Update by supporting FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can't stick your finger in the eye of the most powerful organization on the planet without prayer. And we covet your prayer. Now, continuing, it says, so there you have it. What more proof do you want? President Bill Clinton was jobbed into office, into the White House, by his Jesuit handlers, whose intellectual heavyweights are headquartered at Georgetown University. As someone once said, these Jesuits are ambitious, flatterers of princes and deceitful courtiers, everywhere entangling themselves in secular business and in politics. They are the Pied Pipers of Rome. No man who remains among them or is mentored by them can retain his integrity or honesty. So says some of the most reliable authors, not least the ex-Jesuit Marcet de la Roche-Arnaud, who spent 8 years in a Jesuit seminary. If you're wondering why you haven't heard about this conspiracy before, it's because the Jesuits control every facet of the information industry: television, newspapers, and even public education. But they don't control Inquisition Update. That I guarantee you. Now, Chapter 37 of the book is entitled The Rhodes Gang, Instruments of the Round Table, begins with a quote from Professor Carroll Quigley. Jesuit Professor Carroll Quigley says, "I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years." Unquote. The chapter begins, "The astute reader cannot but recognize the source and purpose of the Rhodes-Milner plot. Let us examine this Orwellian-like plan more closely. We learn from Professor Quigley and the Chicago Tribune that the following well-known international organizations or networks, most of which are secretive organizations, were set up under the Rhodes-Milner scheme: the Times, the Bilderberg Group, America's Bohemian Grove Club, the Club of Rome, the Council on Foreign Relations, Neurocam International, Rhodes-Milner Roundtable Groups, otherwise known as the Round Table, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, also known today as Chatham House, the Trilateral Commission, and the United Nations. These are some of the quote-unquote instruments which Professor Quigley says are at the disposal of the Rhodes Secret Society. He tells us that in New York, the Round Table Group was known as the Council on Foreign Relations. These Round Table instruments, says Quigley, were designed to promulgate the idea of the formation of a federal or one world government, based on the notions of the unification of the British Empire and the United States of America. This British-American reunification lark is a ruse in the best Jesuitical tradition. The reader will recall that Quigley, a Jesuit priest, tells us that the Constitution of the Round Table, the Council on Foreign Relations, and those many organizations funded by the Rhodes Wills, such as the Rhodes Scholarship Fund, etc., are all based on the constitutions of the Jesuits, with the words Roman Catholic Church merely being replaced by British Empire. These institutions are little more than actors in a puppet show. The reader may wish to consult Larry Abrams' Call It Conspiracy, a well-documented expose of the Council on Foreign Relations. It has even been intimated that General Booth, founder of the Salvation Army, played a role in the Rhodes Roundtable Group. There are also claims that Cherry Blair, wife of the former Prime Minister Tony Blair, is an ancestor of Mr. Booth and the notorious John Wilkes Booth. But that's just an aside. The following reports, clipped from the Chicago Tribune, are particularly worthy of mention. In the July 15, 1951 issue, the Tribune ran an article by William Fulton entitled Rhodes Ideals Slant State Department Policies, subtitled Key Posts Held by Oxford Scholars. It read, quote, "Key positions in the United States Department of State are held by a network of American Rhodes Scholars. Rhodes Scholars are men who obtain supplemental education and indoctrination at Oxford University, with the bills paid by the estate of Cecil Rhodes. Rhodes wrote about his ambition to cause the ultimate recovery of the United States of America as an integral part of the British Empire." And remember, if those words have been replaced, this is the constitutions of the Jesuits, remember. It's the Roman Catholic Empire, the Roman Empire. Remember Daniel chapter 2. Do not forget Daniel chapter 2. So here it says in print, British Empire, but it really means Roman Catholic Church. It continues with a quote. It says, his intimates have admitted the scholarships were established for the primary purpose of instilling political bias rather than providing education. Political bias. Politics is their main modus operandi. And they use politics. If the American people could just comprehend how corrupt and Jesuitical and how much the Vatican controls the politics in this country. Rome wins no matter who's in power. Rome has her minions both in the Democratic and the Republican Party. Every time you go to the polls to vote in a presidential election, you waste your vote. Do you comprehend that? Whether you vote Democratic or Republican, you waste your vote. Worse than that, you give a mandate. You give a mandate to whichever papal candidate is finally elected. It's an outrage. How could this happen in this country? And how hard it is to convince the American people that no matter who's in power, Democratic or Republican, the Pope's agenda keeps marching on. And until we put our focus on who controls the politics in this country, we'll never muster the courage to face it. Now, the same newspaper, July 16th, 1951, William Fulton wrote another article, Rhodes' Ideas Find Fertile Ground in the United Nations, subtitled Scholars Advance British Schemes. Remember, Roman Catholic Church schemes. It says, New York, July 1st, American Rhodes Scholars, men who have received education and indoctrination at Oxford University, England, are prominent in the affairs of the United Nations. The UN is an outgrowth of schemes developed by the scholar's patron, Cecil Rhodes. In his writings, the Diamond Despot of South Africa showed he hoped the scholarships would promote his grandiose idea. 32 American collegians go to Oxford each year under the terms of Rhodes' will, unquote. And in the Tribune, July 19, 1951, in an article entitled Rhodes Ward's Hawk Global Scheme in the United States, subtitled Peddle Propaganda for One World, Fulton reported, quote, New York, July 19th, Rhodes Scholars return from schooling and indoctrination at Oxford University, England, are the principal hawkers of globalist propaganda in the United States. Previous articles in this series have disclosed that many of the 1,185 living American Rhodes Scholars have obtained key positions in the State Department, the United Nations, the Economic Cooperation Administration, and other government agencies where they have worked toward fulfillment of the schemes of their imperial patron. Their imperial patron. Building an empire for their patron, Cecil Rhodes, who was a Jesuit. It's just Jesuitism under another plan. And I'm telling you, this is, I hope you're comprehending the gravity of the information that we're getting from this book. He says, I have denoted an entire chapter on the occult origin of the philosophy of the United Nations in Volume 2 of this work. It will suffice here to quote the following statement from Jesuit-trained David Spangler, Director of Planetary Initiative for the United Nations, quote, no one will enter the New World Order unless he or she is willing to make a pledge to worship Lucifer. No one will enter the new age unless he will take a Luciferian initiation, unquote. I must also mention that the Lucis Trust, previously called the Lucifer Publishing Company, has the responsibility of managing the meditation room at the United Nations building in New York. To return to the writings of Carroll Quigley, Professor Quigley personally confirmed the existence of the network of helpers behind the Rhodes scheme. Quote, I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have for much of my life been close to it and to many of its instruments. It wishes to remain unknown. I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known. And I do too. And I help it to be known every day. Now, what are these instruments to which Quigley refers? According to Quigley, Rhodes and his mentor Steed agreed to make Washington, D.C. the capital of the whole organization, or allow parts of the empire to become states of the American Union, unquote. If Washington was to be the seat of the Rhodes Jesuit-like secret society, could it be that the Jesuits control Washington through their acolytes, Messrs. Clinton and Bush? Quigley writes further in his renowned and very remarkable work, Tragedy and Hope, that the Rhodes Society of Elect was formally established in 1891, but that its outer circle, known as the Association of Helpers, was later organized by Lord Milner as the Round Table. Money for their activities originally came from Cecil Rhodes, J.P. Morgan, the Rockefeller and Whitney families, and associates of bankers Lazard Brothers and Morgan, Crenfell and Company. These are the banking corporations that run America's economy today and are just a few of the quote-unquote instruments of which Quigley speaks. Now do you understand why the economy is going straight down the dumper? They're ready to impose upon us a Luciferian papal government, destroy our Protestant rights, and subject us to a global papal tyranny. And if we won't go quietly, they'll silence us forever. That's the strategy. There's no other conclusion that can be drawn by the information in this book. As Will Banyan observes in his 6-part series, Rockefeller Internationalism, because of the many secret societies he spawned, Mr. Rhodes could proudly claim the accolade, modern heir, quote, to Adam Weishaupt, a Jesuit, founder of the Bavarian Illuminati, unquote. Indeed, Weishaupt taught his disciples that the agencies of his order were never to be known by their real identities, but always under other names. So if you're a Rhodes Scholar, you're an Illuminati. And what is Illuminati? Jesuitism. The Jesuits are like chameleons. They blend in with any environment they're in, changing their names, infiltrating organizations like Freemasonry and the other secret societies. When one thinks of a Jesuit, one has to get out of the habit of thinking of a black-robed priest in a collar. They're everywhere. Now he's going to speak a little bit about John Birch, the Pilgrims Society. He says, I beg the reader's indulgence to dwell a little longer on these secret connections. In the final stages of my research for this volume, I came across a document titled The Belmont Brotherhood. It alleges that most of the founding members of the John Birch Society were high-ranking Freemasons. Here we go with Freemasonry again, and members of the Rhodes scheme. Remember, Rhodes was a Freemason. It says, this document further alleges that the John Birch Society was the foundation for another society known as the Pilgrim Society, and that both of these societies have their origins in the Cecil Rhodes Milner Round Table group of Great Britain and are the elite of the elite. The Pilgrim Society was founded, or rather set up, in 1902, just 4 months after Cecil Rhodes died, which is when his wills would have taken effect. The Pilgrims' first international dinner was held in 1903. As then today, the members and guests at its dinners are diplomats, high-ranking soldiers, and other men of distinction in many fields, like Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. The patron of this Pilgrim Society is none other than Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II. Now, we know she's a Dame of Malta as well. Notably, several key persons who were at the secret meeting in 1913, which formed the privately owned American Central Bank, also known as the Federal Reserve, were also Pilgrims. And, of course, J.P. Morgan, George F. Baker, John D. Rockefeller, Jacob Schiff, and Tony Blair were also members. Further, it is known that the Pilgrim Society runs institutions as Barclays, National Westminster, HSBC Bank Group, and Standard Chartered Bank Group, etc. In this way, the Rhodes Pilgrim Society is truly here and everywhere. Speaking of the power of the Pilgrim Society, at the House of Commons on August 20th, 1941, Winston Churchill, also a Pilgrim member, said, quote, "No one could stop it," unquote. Some say that not just Masonic, but also Templar and Rosicrucian influences can be found within the Pilgrim Society. The Pilgrim Society is also an arm of Skull and Bones. Francis F. Randolph and the Pilgrim Society was the treasurer for the Russell Trust, which is the official corporate name of Skull and Bones. In November of 2006, Pope Benedict XVI invited CFR member Henry Kissinger, who was the member of the Masonic Pilgrim Society and a former U.S. Secretary of State to Richard Nixon, to be his political advisor. That's right, Henry Kissinger is a political advisor to Pope Benedict XVI. And it says, the 83-year-old Nobel laureate was offered the high-profile role during a private audience with the Pope and will be on the Papal Advisory Board for Foreign and Political Affairs. Curiously, and perhaps no more than curiosity, Pope Benedict, once a member of Hitler's youth under the Nazi regime, and Henry Kissinger are not only close in age, but were both born in Bavaria, the home of Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati. Incidentally, Mr. Kissinger, like Adam Weishaupt and Jesuit founder Ignatius Loyola, is a Jew. See where this is going? They're going to declare this a Jewish conspiracy, and it's not in God's Word. And it's critical that we understand what God's Word says about this coming New World Order. Now he's going to talk about the Rhodes plan to control the media. Rhodes gave explicit instructions that his secret society should own portions of the American press. The reader will recall that in his 1877 Confession of Faith, Rhodes wrote that he envisioned his secret society owning portions of the press, for the press rules the minds of the people, unquote. The Jesuit Carol Quigley, told us that one arm of Rhodes' society, quote, has been known at various times as the Times Crowd, and that in 1983 the Times newspaper had 6 Rhodes Scholars on its board. So what business do you suppose the Times is up to? The Pope's business. A global government for the papacy. He says, I now highlight for your attention the following statements of John Swinton, former head of the editorial staff of the New York Times, then the prominent New York journalist and called by his peers the dean of his profession. This is what he said to his colleagues at a New York press club. Quote, "There's no such thing at this date in the world's history in America as an independent press. I'm paid weekly for keeping my honest opinions out of the paper I am connected with. Others of you are paid similar salaries for similar things, and any of you who would be so foolish as to write honest opinions would be out on the streets looking for another job. The business of the journalist is to destroy the truth, to lie outright. We are the tools and the vassals of rich men behind the scenes. We are the jumping jacks. They pull the strings and we dance. We are intellectual prostitutes," unquote. And Noam Chomsky, the distinguished linguist, observes, quote, "The raw material of news must pass through successive filters, leaving only the cleansed residue fit to print," unquote. It is the Jesuit Illuminati who controls most of the media, who act the part of information caddies. As Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, said, quote, "Think of the press as a great keyboard on which the government can play," unquote. We must go back to Professor Quigley to appreciate the extent of this media control. Quigley makes this stunning statement, quote, "The American branch of this English establishment, that is the Round Table, extended much of its influence through 5 American newspapers, the New York Times, New York Herald Tribune, Christian Science Monitor, the Washington Post, and the lamented Boston Evening Transcript," unquote. In England, they controlled the Times of London and the editorship of the Observer. The Times News Group is owned by the Astor family. We saw that this strategy to control the media was expressly provided for by Rhodes' Confession of Faith. Thus, when on February 17, 1950, CFR member James Warburg, the architect of the Federal Reserve System, told a Senate Foreign Relations Committee, quote, "We shall have one world government whether you like it or not, by conquest or consent," unquote. The media remained silent. And in the April 1974 issue of the CFR Journal, Foreign Affairs, page 558, Richard N. Gardner stated that the New World Order will be built and it will end national security, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. Again, the media was mute. Well, this media won't be muted until God silences us. Thanks for listening. We'll talk about it more on the program tomorrow. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the Scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.